Hi, we're here to solve quadratics by using the quadratic formula. So let's talk about first what a formula is. So a formula is a written rule. You know, some of the most famous ones are area is equal to length times width, or volume is equal to length times width times height, where we eventually replace the letters that we know with numbers. Right? The same here. Our quadratic formula is going to help us solve a quadratic. So solving means that we're trying to find out what x is equal to. So like if I give you this equation down here, we're trying to find out what x is. The way that we do that is we replace the letters in front of that x, like the a, the b, and the c, with whatever numbers that we know. So here we're going to say that our x is equal to the opposite of b, that middle one, plus or minus, because eventually, remember that most of the time we have two x's. Sometimes we might have only one, sometimes we might not have any x's at all, but a majority of times you end up with two. So this plus and this minus takes care of that situation. All right, so we do the plus or minus of the square root. Last week we talked about what a square root was, but we'll talk about it some more today. We do the square root of our middle term, b, to the second power, minus 4 times a, which is our first one, times c, which is our last one. All of that is over 2 times our first term. All right, so notice that I referenced this equation down here, this ax squared plus bx plus c. This is my standard form. And any equation written in this form can be solved using this formula. So you're probably asking yourself, like, we have two more ways of solving, by factoring, by square roots. Why would we want to use this formula? It looks so complicated with that plus and the minus and the square root. Well, sometimes, like down here, you will have problems that have decimals or fractions, and we don't know how to use those by factoring or by square roots. So these are very helpful, like this formula is very helpful for solving these two problems. It is also helpful whenever you're given a really large number. So here, if we were trying to factor it by hand, you will multiply your first and your last number, right? Your a and your c. 1,000 times 2 gives me 2,000. So the first step in factoring is to figure out what are the factors of 2,000. So this would keep going forever. You would get so many factors. We probably don't want to do this by hand. So an easy way to solve this is by using your quadratic formula. All right, so we're going to do one example on using the quadratic formula. So let's say I give you this problem here. X squared plus 3x minus 4. The first step is to find out what your a, b, and c are. So we're going to take this equation and we're going to label it. We're going to find out what your a, your b, and your c are. And if I don't know what number goes in front of my x, what number do I assume it has? I assume it starts with a 1. So this first term, this a, is 1. Your b is 3, and your c is negative 4. Make sure that you paid attention to these signs here. All right, because that negative 4 needs to come in, like it needs to stay negative here. All right, so step number 1 is to label it, to find out what a, b, and c are. Step number 2 is to plug in those numbers where they correspond in our formula. So let's do that next. Where we see the negative b, it means that we're going to do the opposite of our b, opposite of our middle term. So right now we have a positive 3. What is the opposite? It is to put a negative 3. The opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of the middle term to the second power, which is 3 squared, minus 4 times our a, which is our first term, times our last term, which is our c, all over 2 times a, 2 times our first. All right, we're going to simplify that next. Let's start first with everything that's inside the square root. Let's get rid of those parentheses. So we have the opposite of b, which is negative 3, plus or minus the square root of 3 to the second power. What is 3 to the second power? 3 times 3, which is 9. All right, let's do this part next. What is negative 4 times 1? It's negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4. 2 negatives will make a positive. And 4 times 4 is 16. All right, so we have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 16. And all of that is over 2 times 1. And 2 times 1 is 2. All right, we move on. Next, we're going to simplify what's inside the square root. What is negative 9 plus 16? It is 25. All right, the next thing we're going to do is get rid of that square root. So how do you find the square root of 25? What does the square root of 25 mean? Remember, it is the square root undoes the power of 2. We are trying to find out from the factors of 25, which one would undo a power of 2? It would be 5 times 5. All right, we're trying to find out which number times itself would give me 25. It would be that 5. So the square root of 25 is 5. So wherever I see it, I'm going to replace it. Oops, instead of a square root, I'm going to put a 5. All right, we're almost done. All right, second to last step is to split up your fraction into 2 parts. Remember that we have both a positive and a negative, a plus and minus sign. So I'm going to break it up into negative 3 plus 5 over 2 and negative 3 minus 5 over 2. And once I simplify that fraction to the very end, I am done. So let's take the top. What is negative 3 plus 5? They're opposite signs, so I'm going to subtract them and get 2. Because that 5 is bigger, I'm going to take that positive sign in front of it. And what is positive 2 divided by 2? It is a positive 1. All right. Negative 3 and a negative 5 make a bigger negative. I'm going to add them together and get negative 8. Divided by 2, negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So these are my 2 answers, my 2 solutions, my 2 roots, etc., etc. Remember that our goal here the whole time was to find out what x is equal to. So here are what my x's can be equal to. X can be equal to positive 1 or x can be equal to